Don't get in, sir. The voice came from somewhere between the concrete pillar and the back wheel of his car, small, tight, careful, and Preston Vane heard it the way you hear ice shift beneath your feet in early spring, that particular stillness that arrives just before you decide whether to take another step. He was 63 years old, with the kind of silver hair that courtrooms tend to trust and opposing counsel tend to underestimate, and he had been practicing law in Ottawa for 35 years. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to read silence. He paused with his keys already in his hand, the fob warm against his palm, and turned. The girl was standing in the gap between his car and the neighboring SUV. She looked about 9, possibly younger. She wore a yellow rain jacket that had been yellow once and was now the color of old mustard, a pair of 2 large jeans folded twice at the cuff, and boots that had been resoled by someone who was not a cobbler. Her hair was pulled into 2 uneven braids that had not been redone in some days. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder, not a child's bag, the kind a person picks up from a donation bin, and she was holding one hand out flat toward him, palm forward, the way a crossing guard holds back traffic. Her eyes were serious in the way that children's eyes get serious when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long and have finally found the person they were meant to hand it to. Preston did not move toward the car. Something in the way she was standing, not frightened, not performing, just certain, made him stay where he was. "What's wrong?" he said. Not "who are you" or "how did you get in here?" Just "what's wrong," because some part of him already understood that was the right question. "The car," the girl said. "Someone was under it. 3 nights ago I saw him." The underground parking facility beneath 240 Elgin Street was quiet at 6:40 on a Thursday evening. Most of the firm's staff had gone home by 5. Preston had stayed late to finish reviewing a set of trust account ledgers that had been bothering him for 6 weeks, in a way he could not quite name, the kind of discomfort that sits at the edge of a number and will not explain itself. He had planned to drive north after rush hour, make the cottage by 9, spend the long weekend alone with the lake and the silence, and the particular quality of November light on the Rideau that Meredith had loved, and that he still drove up to see, even now, 4 years after she was gone. He took his hand off the key fob. He put it in his pocket. "Come here," he said, and he moved toward the hood of the car rather than the door, putting more distance between himself and the driver's side. "Come out where I can see you. You're not in any trouble." The girl stepped out from beside the rear wheel. She walked to the front of the car and stopped. She kept a careful distance, not the distance of fear, but the distance of a child who has learned not to assume that closeness is safe until it has been proven. "Tell me your name first," Preston said. "Maisie," she said, "Maisie Tremblay." "How old are you, Maisie?" 9, 10 in March. "How did you get into the parking garage?" "The stairwell by the loading dock. The latch on the ground level door doesn't catch properly. I've been sleeping in the stairwell the last 2 weeks. It's dry. Nobody uses it after 7. She said this without apology and without shame, as a simple accounting of facts, and Preston received it the same way. "All right, tell me what you saw." Maisie took a breath. It was a preparatory breath, the kind a child takes, before reciting something they have gone over many times in their head, because they are afraid of forgetting a detail that matters. 3 nights ago, Monday. It was after midnight and I was in the stairwell, but I came out because I heard a noise, a rolling sound like a toolbox on concrete. There was a man, white jacket, blue stripes on the sleeves like a mechanic's jacket. He had a headlamp on. He was under your car. I know it was your car because you parked in the same spot every day this week, and I learned the number, 4C12. Preston said nothing. He let her continue. He was under there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but I heard sounds, metal, and something liquid, and then a tapping. When he came out, he had a small wrench in his hand, and he wiped it on a rag and put it in the bag. Then he made a phone call. He was standing right there. She pointed to the space beside the front passenger door, perhaps 4 meters from where Preston was standing. I was behind the pillar. He didn't see me. What did he say on the phone? Maisie took another breath. Her hands were still at her sides. She was not fidgeting. He said, "It's sorted. The tie rod end on the driver's side, I've weakened the joint. It'll feel normal in the city, in traffic, but at highway speed, sustained pressure, it'll go. He takes the 416 north every Friday. By the time he's past the Kemptville exit, he won't have steering." Then he stopped talking and listened for a long time, and then he said, "The files are already moved to the secondary account. Once he's gone, we move the assets by end of day Friday. Kessler handles the documents. It's clean." And then he said, "Don't call this number again." And then he hung up. The parking garage was so quiet. Preston could hear the ventilation system running somewhere overhead. He became aware of his own breathing. He made it slower. He was a man who had spent 3.5 decades learning to control what his face did when information arrived. He had sat across from clients in the worst moments of their lives and given them clarity instead of his own distress. He had stood in courtrooms and received verdicts that destroyed years of work and thanked the judge before he sat down. He kept his face arranged now, but his chest had gone very still. Kessler, he said. The name came out even, the way a careful man says the name of someone he has trusted for 5 years when he discovers he should not have. He said that name. Yes, sir. And then he hung up. Yes, sir. He walked back to the stairwell by the loading dock, the same one I use. I pressed myself behind the door and he didn't see me. He was in a hurry. Preston looked at the car. He looked at it the way a person looks at a familiar thing that has just stopped being what they thought it was. The car was a dark blue Volvo 4 years old. He had bought it for the heated seats and the all-wheel drive and the reputation for safety. He had put perhaps 40,000 kilometers on it, driving the same route north every Friday evening since Meredith died, because the cottage was the only place he had ever fully stopped thinking about work. He looked at Maisie. She was watching him with an expression he recognized from 35 years of sitting across from people in difficulty. It was not the expression of a child seeking praise. It was the expression of someone who has done a hard thing and is now simply waiting to find out whether it mattered. You've been waiting to tell someone this for 3 days, he said. I tried Tuesday. I went to the security desk in the lobby and told the man at the desk that someone had been under a car in the parking garage. He told me to leave or he'd call the police. So I left, she paused. I didn't want to leave without telling somebody. So I waited for you to come down. How did you know which person owned the car? I didn't. I just waited by your car at the end of the day, and whoever came to it, I would tell them. You're the first person who stopped to listen. Preston put his hand in his jacket pocket. He found his phone. He held it without dialing for a moment. He thought about Joel Kessler, 41 years old, junior partner, 5 years with the firm. Charming in client meetings, meticulous with documentation, the kind of lawyer who remembered every associate's birthday and whose desk was always clean. Preston had mentored him personally for the first 2 years. He had recommended him for partnership. He had sat beside him at the dinner the firm held when the partnership was confirmed and bought the table's wine. He had also, 6 weeks ago, begun quietly auditing the trust accounts Joel managed, not because of anything he could name precisely. Because of a feeling, a disbursement that had cleared 3 days earlier than it should have, a reference code that didn't correspond to anything in the file directory, the kind of discrepancy that a busy man dismisses and a careful man does not. He had not told Joel he was auditing. He had not told anyone. But someone had known. Preston called the police. He called 911 and he said his name and the address and the nature of the problem. And he said there was a child present who was the eyewitness and that she was 9 years old and needed to be handled with care. He said he had not touched the vehicle. He gave the space number. He said he would be at the car. He hung up. Maisie was looking at him with an expression that was close to relief but not quite. It was something more careful than relief. The look of someone who has been disbelieved enough times that being believed feels less like safety and more like the beginning of a wait to see whether the believing holds. Thank you, Preston said, for coming back, for waiting 3 days. Maisie nodded once. Are you hungry? He asked. A little. I have a granola bar from this morning. It's not much. That's okay. He found it in his jacket's inside pocket, still in the wrapper, slightly bent. He held it out. Maisie took it with both hands and unwrapped it carefully, the way a person unwraps something when they are not certain when the next one is coming, and she ate it in small, deliberate bites while they waited. He watched and did not comment. Where have you been sleeping, besides the stairwell? He asked. Before that, there's a vestibule behind the cathedral on Sussex Drive. It's warmer when the wind comes off the river. How long have you been away from the group home? She looked at him. How did you know it was a group home? You listed the stairwell and the cathedral doorway without embarrassment, the way a person lists the places they sleep when they've had practice, explaining it to adults. They're not yet sure they can trust. Maisie considered this. 11 weeks, she said. I left in September. There was a new supervisor. He made up rules that weren't real rules. I tried to tell the caseworker, and the caseworker said I was exaggerating, so I left. She finished the last bite of the granola bar and folded the wrapper precisely in half. I know I'm not supposed to leave, but I'm not going back there. All right, Preston said. He didn't argue. He had been a lawyer long enough to know that sometimes the person who says, "I tried to tell someone and wasn't believed," is also the person who is exactly right. Detective Clara Dunn arrived 11 minutes after the first responding unit. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with close cropped dark hair, and the kind of methodical stillness that comes not from calm but from discipline. She wore charcoal blazer and carried a notebook. She showed Preston her identification before she said anything else, and then she looked at Maisie. She spoke to Maisie first. She introduced herself by first name, asked whether Maisie had eaten. Preston explained about the granola bar, and she dispatched a constable to the Tim Hortons across the street. The constable came back 13 minutes later with a chicken sandwich and a hot chocolate that Maisie accepted with a careful thank you, and ate in a way that told the detective, as it had told Preston, that the child had not had a warm meal in longer than a 9-year-old should ever have to calculate. Maisie recited everything again, the same way she had recited it to Preston. Unhurried, exact, with the precision of a child who has spent 3 days being afraid of forgetting a word that matters. Clara Dunn wrote without looking down at her notebook. While Maisie spoke, 2 members of the forensic team placed a mat beneath the Volvo and lowered a camera on a flexible cable under the chassis. The technician with the clipboard walked to Clara Dunn after 8 minutes and murmured 4 sentences close to her ear. She did not change expression. She nodded once. When he stepped away, she said to Preston quietly, "The driver's side tie rod end has been deliberately compromised. It's a partial cut, not severed, weakened. Under sustained lateral load at highway speed, the joint would have failed. The failure would have looked consistent with metal fatigue on any post-incident assessment, particularly if the vehicle caught fire on impact." She paused. "Whoever did this has done it before. The cut is precise." Preston looked at the car for a moment. He thought of the Kemptville exit, which was where he usually pushed the Volvo past 110 to make up time, and of the long curve on County Road 43 that Meredith had always said he took too fast. Then he looked away. "Mr. Vane," Clara Dunn said, "is there anyone in your professional life who would benefit materially from your death?" "Yes," Preston said. He said it without hesitation, because he had been thinking about nothing else since Maisie said the name Kessler. "I believe so, and I think I know why he moved when he did." He told her carefully and completely. He told her about the trust accounts, the quiet audit, the disbursement that had cleared 3 days too early, the reference code that led nowhere. He told her that Joel Kessler managed those accounts, that the amount he had traced so far was approximately $1.3 million across 3 client files, drawn over 16 months. That Joel had access to the secondary document repository where Preston had been storing his working notes. That Joel would have gone looking, because Joel was meticulous, and meticulous people always check what others are checking. He told her about a firm dinner 6 weeks ago. The way Joel had paused with his wine glass when Preston mentioned offhand that he was reviewing some older disbursement files. Just a pause, half a second. The kind of pause that a man notices when he is not yet ready to name what he is noticing. Clara Dunn wrote in small, steady strokes. "We'll move on Kessler tonight," she said. "I need you to give me the audit documentation, everything you have. I need you to not contact him by any method. If he's monitoring firm communications, any change in your pattern tells him something shifted. Do you have somewhere you can stay that he doesn't know about?" "My cottage on the Rideau Lakes. It's registered under my late wife's name. Meredith had kept her maiden name professionally, so the title reads Meredith Lachance. Joel doesn't know the property exists." "Good. We'll arrange transport." She looked at him for a moment. "In the morning, I'll also need you to formally file what you found in the audit. It won't be comfortable, but it will hold." She turned to Maisie. "Is there anyone who will worry tonight if you don't come back?" Maisie held the paper cup in both palms. "Remy," she said, "at the diner on Mackenzie. He gives me supper sometimes when the kitchen's closing. If I don't come in before he locks up, he checks the doorway of the cathedral." "Has he done that before?" "Once, in October when I had a cold and fell asleep early." She looked at the cup. "He's not supposed to know I sleep outside. I think he knows anyway. He gives me soup and doesn't ask questions." Clara Dunn wrote the name and the address and underlined it twice. They left the parking garage at 8:15 in a plain gray sedan from the department fleet. They stopped once on the way out of the city. The diner on Mackenzie Avenue was small and bright and smelled of roasted coffee and something with gravy. At 8:20, the last 2 tables were still occupied. Behind the counter, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a close-trimmed gray beard and a white apron was wiping down the espresso machine. He looked up when the door opened. He saw the detective's posture and the plain sedan idling outside, and his face did the small, careful thing that people's faces do when official visitors arrive without warning at night. Then he saw Maisie. He came out from behind the counter without taking off the apron. "Ça va, Maisie? Are you hurt? What's happened?" He crouched in front of her and looked at her hands, her face, her hands again. Remy Bouchard had been running this diner for 22 years and had quietly fed perhaps 100 street kids in that time. The way people do a thing when they have decided. It is simply part of what a person does, and not a story worth telling. "I'm okay," Maisie said. "I delivered the message." He listened. Remy looked up at Preston. He took in the suit, the silver hair, the particular posture of a man accustomed to being the most capable person in a room who does not currently feel that way. "She came to you," Remy said. "She came to me. She waited 3 days to find me, and then she found me." Preston paused. "She saved my life, Mr. Bouchard. I came here because she wanted you to know she was all right. She told me about you on the way to the car." Remy's face did something complicated and brief that he resolved quickly. He looked back down at Maisie. "You ate?" he said. "Yes, a sandwich, hot chocolate." "Bon." He put one broad hand on her shoulder carefully. "You're going somewhere safe tonight?" "Yes." He looked at Preston again. It was a direct and thorough look. The way a person looks at someone they are entrusting with something irreplaceable and want to know that the other person understands what that means. "She is not from the system," Remy said quietly. "She is from herself. You understand the difference?" "I do," Preston said. Remy nodded once. He went behind the counter and came back with a small brown paper bag folded at the top. He held it out to Maisie. "Tourtière from today, and oatmeal cookies for the drive." He straightened and looked at Preston. "You call me when she is settled. The number is on the window out front. You call before we open or after we close, and I will answer." "Before 8 tomorrow morning," Preston said. Remy put his hand briefly on the top of Maisie's head, the way people do when words would be either too much or not enough, and they have decided wisely not to choose between them. Then he went back behind the counter and continued what he'd been doing and did not watch them go, because he was the kind of man who understands that a clean goodbye is a gift. The drive north was quiet. Maisie ate one oatmeal cookie and fell asleep against the door with the paper bag in her lap before they reached the Queensway. Preston watched the dark highway. He thought about the audit pages on his desk and the Kemptville exit and the sound a tie rod end makes when it fails at speed, which he knew from a transport litigation case 14 years ago in which 3 people had died, and he had spent 11 months learning more about vehicle mechanics than any lawyer should need to know. He thought about how she had said once, and about how she had said once that the Rideau Lakes in November looked like a painting by someone who had not yet decided whether to be sad or grateful, and had chosen to be both at once. He thought about a 9-year-old girl sleeping in a stairwell for 11 weeks, coming back to the same parking space every evening at the end of the workday to wait for the owner of a car she had seen being tampered with, trying once, being turned away, and coming back anyway. He did not yet think about Joel Kessler. There would be time for that tomorrow, and it would not be a pleasant time, and it was enough to do it once rather than twice. A social worker named Diane Prue arrived at the cottage at 10:15. She knocked softly and showed her identification before stepping inside, and she had brought with her, Preston noticed, a fleece blanket still in its plastic wrap, a pair of thick wool socks, and a thermos of warm milk with honey, because someone at the department had told her the child was 9 and had been out in early November. She did not ask Maisie hard questions. She asked whether Maisie was warm, whether she had eaten, whether anyone had frightened her tonight. Maisie said yes to the first 2 and no to the third. Diane Prue made 3 marks in her file, and that was the whole of the intake. Afterward, with Maisie asleep on the couch under the fleece blanket, Diane Prue sat across from Preston at the kitchen table and folded her hands. "I have been doing this work for 19 years, she said, "and I'm going to tell you something I don't say to most people who sit where you're sitting at this hour of the night." She looked at him directly. This child has been failed by people whose job was to pay attention, and she built herself a structure of survival out of a stairwell and a diner and a cathedral doorway and 3 days of patience that most grown adults could not sustain. She is not broken. She is tired and watchful, and she has something her mother gave her that the streets have not been able to take. What she does not have is a person. "I understand," Preston said. "I mean not a benefactor, not a firm that sends a check, a person who is there when she's sick in February, who comes to the school concert, who answers when she calls." Diane Prue looked at him steadily. "You are 63 years old and you live alone. I'm not asking whether tonight changed you. I'm asking whether tomorrow morning, when it is not dramatic and not urgent, you will still want what you believe you want right now." Preston was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the lake was a dark, flat line beneath a sky that had just enough cloud cover to hold the cold in rather than let it go. "My wife and I tried to adopt for 11 years, he said. "We came close twice. The second time was very close. After that, Meredith said she needed to stop, and I agreed because she needed me to. She put everything she had into other things instead. A foundation, a scholarship fund, a legal aid clinic she helped build from scratch. She did everything a person can do for children from the other side of a desk." He looked at the window. "She died 4 years ago. Everything she built is still running. But there is no one at the table." He looked at Diane Prue. "I have perhaps 15 good years left. Maybe 20 if I take better care of myself than I have been. I was going to spend all of them driving to an empty cottage on Fridays. And then a 9-year-old climbed out from between the rear wheel and a concrete pillar and changed that. I am not confused about what I want. What I am asking is how to do it correctly, so that it holds, and so that she is never the one who finds out first if I have fallen short." Diane Prue looked at him for a long moment. "Then we start the paperwork in the morning," she said, "and we do it right." Detective Clara Dunn called at 7:52. Joel Kessler had been arrested at his Westboro condominium at 7:15 as he was leaving for the office. He had remained composed, she said, until the officers referenced the forensic report from the parking garage, at which point he had stopped composing entirely and asked for his lawyer. The mechanic, a man with 2 prior fraud convictions who had been operating a cash-only garage in Gloucester, had been picked up 40 minutes later. He had named Kessler within the first hour and had provided records of 2 other jobs in the previous 20 months, both involving wealthy clients whose estate accounts Kessler had also managed, both of whose road accidents had been filed as mechanical failure. "One of those clients didn't survive," Clara Dunn said. Preston was standing at the kitchen window. A thin frost had come down overnight, and the dock planks were silver with it. "Thank you, Detective," he said. "Thank the girl," Clara Dunn said. "She held that information for 3 days and didn't let it go." In the main room, Maisie was awake. She was sitting on the couch with the fleece blanket around her shoulders and her canvas bag between her feet, looking at the lake through the window. She turned when Preston came in. "Is he arrested?" "He is, both of them." She nodded, the same single deliberate nod she had given every important piece of information over the past 14 hours. "Is Remy okay?" "I'm calling him in a few minutes. I'd like you to come with me later when I go to see him. I want to speak with him about something." "What?" "About whether he might want a different arrangement for the diner. There are things I can offer, a proper operating structure, a better lease negotiation, enough support that he isn't locking up alone every night at 11. He may say no, he is his own person, and it is entirely his decision. But I'd like him to be able to decide." Preston paused. "He's been doing his best for you with what he had. I'd like to give him more to work with." Maisie looked at him for a long moment with the same gravity she had brought to every question the night before. Then she got up from the couch and came to stand beside him at the window. She was small beside the glass. The lake lay still and pewter-colored under the early light. A pair of mergansers moved slowly across the far end in a single line, leaving 2 thin wakes that barely disturbed the surface. "My mum used to say something," Maisie said. "What did she say?" She said the world only stays honest, because some people decide to say the true thing out loud, even when they're scared. She said most people know the true thing, but they wait to see if someone else will say it first, and then nobody does and nothing changes." Maisie kept her eyes on the water. She said the ones who say it anyway are the ones who hold everything up. Preston did not speak for a moment. The frost on the dock planks was beginning to lift in the thin morning sun, the silver going gradually clear. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," he said. "She was. She made me promise. Say the true thing, even when it's hard, even when nobody's listening. You kept that promise, Maisie." "I tried to." He put his hand very gently on her shoulder. She did not pull away. After a moment, she leaned, almost without seeming to, against his side, the way a person leans against something they have decided is solid and are no longer afraid to trust. And they stood like that at the window, while the frost lifted and the morning came in full and steady over the Rideau Lakes. In a Westboro holding room, a man in a good suit was waiting for his lawyer and beginning to understand that the lawyer would not be enough. In a diner on Mackenzie Avenue, a broad-shouldered cook was already making coffee, about to answer a phone call that would change the way his mornings went from now on. In an office across the city, a woman named Diane Prue was opening a file, and beginning carefully and without fanfare to write the paperwork that would start the slow and proper building of a life that had not existed the day before. The Mergansers reached the far shore and disappeared into the reeds. It was a good morning. It was going to be the first of a great many.